Hello and welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to talk about is monitoring your Power Automate RPA processes using the new feature found in the Power Automate Maker portal. Let's go. So let's talk a little bit about why this episode is important. So much like when we talked about on the analytics episode a few sessions ago, RPA processes represent high value opportunities for an organization. So as a result, when you've got something of high value, you want to pay attention to it. And that's what CoEs are looking for. They want to be able to gain insights into the status and health of their automations, and they want to be able to do this in near real time. It isn't satisfactory to be waiting for, refreshes that could be hours or days apart. And so this is the opportunity with the new feature called Monitor inside of the Power Automate Maker portal, which allows us to aggregate our processes that we have access to and to be able to gain some visibility across those. Another feature that's also included in here is the ability to manage the priority of your executions when it comes to your gateway clusters. Now, a cluster can contain one or more nodes, but the whole idea of being able to push that very time-sensitive job ahead of other jobs that may not be as time-sensitive is hugely important and also part of this new capability. Before we dive deeper into the content, I wanted to let you know about an emerging community found at serverlessnotes.com. This is a community resource that covers best practices, tips, and latest announcements built on contributions by technology enthusiasts from around the globe. On serverlessnotes.com, you'll find content related to Power Automate, Azure Logic Apps, Azure Service Bus, Azure Functions, and much, much more. Serverlessnotes.com is brought to you by Serverless 360, a portal that is focused on operations and support for Microsoft Azure serverless resources. Now, this is a complementary tool to the Azure portal, and it helps organizations in supporting Azure serverless applications. You can find out more about Serverless 360 at serverless360.com. Okay, so where do I find this new feature? So as I mentioned before, it is in the Power Automate Maker portal, flow.microsoft.com. And on the left nav, we're going to see a new drop down here called Monitor. And when we go ahead and click on Monitor, we're going to see two new capabilities. One is called Runs, the other is called Run Queues. And that's what we're going to go ahead and further discuss in our demo. So with that said, let's go ahead and let's jump right into that demo. Okay, so here we are. We're in the Power Automate Maker portal. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to kick off this process, and we're going to run this a few times. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and call three different RPA processes that we do have. And what I've got, one is called HR Monthly Extract, one is called Create Work Order, one is called Run Variance Report. Now we're going to go ahead and run these jobs up to 10 times, and just to create some load just so that the monitoring actually makes sense. Now, something to note that's brand new here as well is the drop down for priority. And so this is going to come up when we go ahead and see the Run Queue feature, but here's where we can choose the priority for one of these automations. Now, I had created this flow previous to this feature being available, and as a result, what's going to happen is these aren't populated, but any flow that was created previously is going to use the normal default priority mode itself. So let's go ahead and let's run this, and I'm just going to kick this off a few times just so that we can see this show up in the queue feature. It'll naturally make way more sense if we have some load instead of talking about a static feature itself. So what's happening is all of these automations are going to be running locally on my desktop that we're seeing here. And we've got 4 that are actively running, which is great for me to be able to see what's happening with this API flow. But we want to be able to see greater visibility. So what we can see right now is when we head over to Monitor and then Runs, we can see all of the processes that are running that I have access to here. Now, we can turn on live updates, which is going to provide us near real time. I'm not going to call it real time, but near real time execution and basically updates for us. Now for each of these items that are running, what we can do is we can go ahead and click on the ellipsis, and we can go ahead and say jump over to the parent flows run. Basically that API flow that is actually calling down into these desktop flows. And so that allows us to quickly be able to go ahead and jump into them from that perspective. We also have the ability to see all of the UI flow runs in the parent flow run itself. Now, what this means is we have that cloud flow, right? That API flow that's going to orchestrate all of these events. As I showed you, I'm going to go ahead and call 3 desktop automations as part of that, right? And so that's what's going to give us this ability, is to see what is going on. Are there other automations that are also being called from this same parent itself? So that's another capability that we do have. Let's go ahead, let's make sure this is refreshed. We also can jump into the queue to see exactly where we're at from a queue perspective as well. And so that has also jumped us over into this feature itself called Run Queues. So a little bit more on that later. So this is a great place to get some visibility in terms of what is actively going on, and also the ability to get some additional insights, especially as the ability to link our desktop flow with our cloud flow or API flow. And that's what allows us to see all of those linkages that is happening. So this is a great place to be able to go ahead and get some overall visibility. Now, the next thing that we want to talk about is run queues. So this would be all of the gateways, and you can kind of think of a queue much like a gateway cluster. That's essentially how all of these things get linked together. So I currently have access to 4 gateway clusters. Now, a cluster can really just mean a single machine, but it could also mean multiple machines. So if I did have a gateway cluster that had multiple machines, I would see the number of machines that are participating in that specific cluster itself. Now, what we can see is I've got a gateway cluster here called SB3, and I've got 3 flows, UI flows, now 4 UI flows that are currently in the queue. And we saw that that was updated live because we do have live updates on. So let's go ahead and let's click on this specific gateway cluster, and then let's go ahead and click on the live updates. Now what we can see is we've got one that is running, the run variance report, and then we've got this next one that is called run variance report, which is going to run next, and then we have also something that is queued. Now what we can do, now that that other one did disappear, is this where we would have the ability to go ahead and change its priority. So in this case, this one is set to normal. We could go ahead and flip it to high for this specific execution itself. It doesn't change the overall configuration that we saw in the flow itself, but we're now changing it to high. We can also take this bottom one and let's go ahead and move it to the top, right? So we now can control that it was moved to the top, but it's still considered normal priority, not high like this other one. So this allows us to go ahead and to reorganize and give priority to the different UI processes that are about to run. So if you did see that all of a sudden you've got a month-end process, and on that specific day the cluster is rather busy, and you want the ability to go ahead and make sure that that specific job does get completed first or at a higher priority, we now have the ability to go ahead and manage that. And as I mentioned before, there's kind of 2 ways you can influence that. One is design time by changing that priority setting, but naturally you don't want to go in and be touching flows in production. So if you want to be able to just do that temporarily from a runtime perspective, you can go ahead and modify it in real time, but you will not change the underlying configuration setting itself. So all in all, this is a very important feature. It gives us the ability to see what is going on in our clusters. Naturally, when you're going to have RPA processes in place, you could have many of them, and it can be difficult to manage them one by one. But this is going to give us the ability to see some level of aggregation across all of our different nodes that may be participating in a cluster itself, but then also the ability to go ahead and change the priority as well, as they essentially are in a queue waiting to get picked up and then naturally serviced itself. All right, so that concludes another episode. Thanks for checking it out. If you're not following me on Twitter, I would encourage you to go ahead and do so. You can find me at Weare in order to follow. Obviously, you're watching this on YouTube. Very much appreciate any likes. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to get notifications about when I'm posting. I'm typically posting at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. And you don't want to miss out on any of that Power Platform content. So thanks for checking out this episode, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.